We're gonna wait a minute or two for everybody just to file in, and then we'll kick things off. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Agrifood Conversations, brought to you by iSelect Fund, the Van Trump Report, the Yield Lab Institute, and Family Farms Group. My name is David Yoakum. I'm an associate on the iSelect Fund Ventures team, and I'm excited to walk you through our discussion today. Agrifood Conversations is all about driving innovation in agriculture. Each month, we highlight a specific theme, including emerging topics such as soil health, plant genetics, vertical farming, and aquaculture, to name a few. This month's theme is dairy alternatives. And on the call today, we are joined by Adrian Boda, co-founder and CEO of Origin Milk. Origin's A2 Guernsey milk harkens back to the way milk was centuries ago, with the original taste, nutrition, and genetics that got people drinking cow's milk in the first place. Its milk contains higher levels of vitamins A and D, as well as more calcium, more protein, more omega-3s than modern milks, and is currently being used to produce everything from heavy cream to half and half to butter and yogurt. Now, each of you knows that companies are more likely to succeed with the right network of customers, talent, investors, and advisors. We've invited you to this call because you are some of the smartest, most talented people in Origin Milk's market. You are potential customers for Origin Milk's products and services. You have built a company similar to Origin Milk's, or you are a sophisticated business person or agricultural professional who understands the market and the challenges and opportunities Origin Milk may face. Before we get started, we have a quick poll question to get a better idea of who we have on the call today. Please take a few seconds to answer. And a few process comments while the poll is running. We are not soliciting investment. This presentation is to provide information to help Origin Milk find customers, mentors, and other strategic relationships to help them grow their business. You are all on mute. You can use the chat window to ask a question at any time. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for replay. And so without further delay, I am pleased to introduce Adrian Boda, co-founder and CEO of Origin Milk. Adrian, please feel free to take it away.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me, everyone. Thanks for being on the call and for participating. Really looking forward to making this as interactive and engaging as possible for everybody as we talk about the vision and goal that we have for dairy. If any of you were on any of the previous calls in this month talking about dairy alternatives, it was really interesting to hear the other presenters from Eclipse and from BioMilk as well. And we have a little bit of a different take on this, on what's on the dairy and dairy alternatives. The way we look at it as outsiders from the dairy world, we came in and we looked at dairy and said, hey, this is a behemoth legacy industry that needs to be redone, absolutely ripe for disruption. And there are two ways that you can take this. You can go about this by coming up with an alternative, which is a very fair and good option, or you can look at the industry as a whole and ask the question, how can this be done better? We all recognize that the dairy industry is wreaking havoc on human biology and the environment, and things need to be done in a completely different way. And the question is, can we do that? For us, the answer is yes. And the answer to us is yes in a very obvious way, because we also ask the question of, where is this industry headed? This is an almost $1 trillion industry worldwide, and it's not going anywhere. No matter how many alternatives come onto the market, dairy industry is here to stay. And so the answer for us was, how can we then do it better? How can we improve this industry and get better outcomes for the environment, for human beings, for the animals, all on down throughout that ecosystem? How can we make this better? And for us, the answer was regenerative organic farming and heritage breeds of dairy cows. Since we started Origin Nutrition, which we see as at the nexus of regenerative farming and nutrition. And in this deck, we'll be talking about what we've done so far, but really what we plan to do and what we've launched this year, entering the infant nutrition space. So let's start by discussing the problem, and I'll talk more about Origin and where we've been a little bit later on. But right now, let's talk about what we're trying to tackle next. We've already have market products in market, as was mentioned earlier, fluid milk and dairy products such as cheese and butter, yogurt, etc. But now we want to tackle something that is really ripe for disruption, and that is the infant formula and infant nutrition space, which is just a mediocre Me Too products, stale products that are just looking for disruption. And the quality is pretty low. The ingredients that are used, the formulations that are used are not keeping up with the innovation that is available. And so many parents in America are turning to illegally importing superior infant formula from Europe. And that's a problem that we want to tackle. We want to improve infant formula, do something that hasn't been done before in the space, and bring parents in the US an option that they currently don't have and that they're eager to have because they're willing to illegally import it from other markets. So the solution is a superior quality, regenerative, organic, full-fat infant formula made exclusively from 100% certified A2 heritage cows who produce the highest quality of any breed in the world, period. And so the target is to have the highest quality, fewest ingredients that most closely resemble the genetic makeup of mother's milk. And also for this to be a EU-based formulation that is engineered for FDA approval. And that's very possible. None of these things exist currently anywhere in the US and even throughout the world. In the US, we do not have a full-fat infant formula. We do not have a regenerative organic infant formula. And we do not yet have an A2 heritage infant formula. And all these things we would bring as an innovation to the market. Why origin? Well, we've been there. We've been at this for a number of years now. We have a first-in-class line of premium A2 heritage products in over 20 states and several hundred locations. We've developed IP around our formulation and the proprietary blend of ingredients and technology. We have an exclusive network of A2 heritage farmers around the country that creates a sustainable competitive advantage and a moat. We have figured out how to tailor a formula for the US for FDA approval based on EU standards. We're ready to disrupt the space, and we have a record. The three co-founders have a track record in nutrition and in building a brand. And so we think that this is a very compelling message that we can bring to parents. Parents are currently desperate enough to do something illegal. In many conversations that I have with folks around the country, even potential investors, I get the feedback quite often that, hey, I'm one of those guys illegally importing hip or hole from Europe. This was even mentioned on a call from last week or 2 weeks ago for biomilk. This is a real thing. We'll talk about more down the road how others have tried to mimic that or import infant formula from Europe, which is still currently illegal. And so what we said is we have a product market fit, a clear unmet need, and a very motivated consumer. Folks that are otherwise willing to do something that they know is illegal and pay a premium for it, and we can deliver that to them here in the US. And we think that that's a winning strategy. We're also starting from scratch. So we're literally reformulating infant formula, deconstructing each component, which no one has yet done. We're a food company that started with that as the base, with the farmer and the superior breed of dairy cows as a base. And so we're using that to reconstruct and build from there in a way that hasn't been done before in this space. And why we also think it's compelling is the impact on the environment. And we'll talk more about how heritage breeds of cows use 20 to 30% less water and feed, and therefore also emit approximately 20 to 30% fewer methane emissions than any other breed. And so it's better for the environment, not just for human beings. What have we done so far, and what are we building upon? We're building upon our 3 hubs, Central Ohio, Eastern Pennsylvania, and in Central Colorado, and the retail relationships that we already have has helped us to set a base and create brand equity to be able to move the ball forward and introduce new products in the nutrition space. Infant nutrition, pediatric nutrition, and adult nutrition, as we'll see a little bit later. Getting back to what makes this unique and what makes our infant formula special, it goes back to these heritage breeds of cows, the Guernsey cows in particular, who produce 3 to 4 gallons of milk per day, compared to 10 to 18 gallons of milk with your traditional, conventional, or organic Holstein, black and white Holstein cows, which account for about 98% of all the dairy in America. And so these cows have been modified for production so that they would increase their production and produce a lot of milk. Heritage breeds of cows produce a lot less milk, and it's a lot more wholesome, rich milk that has 5% plus milk fat, 35% more cream, 35% more vitamins A and D, 12% more protein, on down the line. The omega-3 and the CLAs, et cetera, that are really beneficial for brain development for infants in particular, make a really big impact when we're talking about infant and toddler nutrition. And so the nutritional component is incredibly important to parents of infants or toddlers, but it's also important to adults. And so whether you're drinking Origin milk or with the infant formula, toddler formula, or the protein powder, you're getting a product that is nutritionally superior. The science, how does this work? There was a lot of talk in previous presentations about the idea that so many people cannot tolerate milk, and our bodies haven't really gotten to the point where we can digest it. Mostly Northern Europeans and Westerners can digest milk into adulthood. Well, the science is actually a little bit different. Studies that have been done around the world now confirm that most people who complain of discomfort from dairy, most of those people, about 80% of those people, it has nothing to do with lactose intolerance or dairy allergies. In fact, that has to do with a mutation that occurred only in the Holstein breed of cows, and only in cows, and maybe 1 or 2 other breeds, that mutated their protein from the natural A2 milk protein to the A1 milk protein, which is not naturally digestible by other mammals. So the story is that all mammals originally produce milk with the A2 milk protein, but a mutation occurred in Holstein cows, primarily, and several other dairy breeds, where they now are majority A1 producing proteins. And so when we ingest them as human beings, we cannot process the A1 milk protein. In order for us to metabolize it, a process happens in our bodies, and the result of that is BCM7, beta-casomorphine 7, which causes 2 issues. It causes inflammation in the stomach, and it causes the slowdown of the motility of the food as it moves through our digestive tract, causing literally the food to ferment. And the side effects of these 2 things, the inflammation and the slowdown in motility, are that we then see the symptoms of gas, bloating, headache, diarrhea, constipation, etc. We present with these symptoms to, say, a physician, and many times this is a diagnosis of exclusion, and a physician will say, well, why don't you try laying off dairy for a couple of weeks? Let's see what happens. You do that, you come back and you say, I'm feeling great, I haven't had any of those issues, and a doctor will typically say, oh, very good, you must be lactose intolerant or have a dairy allergy, when in fact, the prevalence of lactose intolerance or dairy allergy in America is about 7%, but between 25 and 30% of people complain of some kind of discomfort when ingesting dairy. And so we know that the delta, much of that is due to the A1 milk protein not being correctly digested and the effects of BCM7. This has been confirmed both in vitro and in vivo, and there are a number of trials that are ongoing even now to help further cement the science behind this, showing that the vast majority of people who have real symptoms of lactose intolerance or dairy allergy can actually drink A2 milk with no problem whatsoever. And this is a win not only for our fluid milk business, but for infant formula, for toddlers, for those who have trouble digesting milk otherwise. So we, as others have shown, we are in a developmental process. We've got milk and other dairy products in over 400 locations, but we're working on toddler and infant formula. And there are a number of things that have to happen over about 18 months for that development to occur. And we continue to launch products as we develop the regulatory framework and submit to the FDA to have an approval for infant formula. Market trends. There is a large company we'll talk about in a little bit, the A2 Milk Company, that launched in Australia, New Zealand, and in China with their infant formula and their fluid milk. And just wanted to show a quick snapshot. Many people do not know what A2 Milk is all about. And if you do a Google search and you look at the comparison between the US and Australia, and you go back about 15 years, you see how in Australia that has become a very sought after or Google searched topic, both for milk and for infant formula. And you see how this is starting to become a thing in the US slowly but surely. The market size, it's a very good CPG market for both infant formula, milk market, and then to throw in there a third, the US protein market, which is another vertical that we would like to develop down the road. A go-to-market strategy for us is to really focus on both the B2C and the B2B. There are options here and very good opportunities, both with consumers that are seeking a superior product, an infant formula, toddler formula, an adult nutrition product, but also in the business-to-business space in the supply chain, where currently a regenerative organic A2 powder does not exist. We have some really great strategic partnerships such as MadAg and Terra Genesis and several others, where we've come together to say, look, we want to do things differently in dairy. And we'd like for you guys to come along, and we'd like to partner to work on how we can execute this on the ground level. And so we currently have 3 hubs of farms, processors, and distribution, as I've mentioned before. And all of those farmers are going through a process of regenerative organic certification at the moment. And we continue to expand that footprint so that our milk products will be represented in each region locally. So wherever you pick up origin milk, we would have sourced that milk from within about 300 to 400 miles of where you've purchased it, with 7 to 10 hubs around the country. So we can bring a product locally and regionally around the country. And then we'll have a centralized processing in Pennsylvania for all the other powder-based nutritional products that we're bringing to market. Talk a little bit about competition. You've seen this slide so many different times, but it's worth throwing up there when you compare what we're building in the infant nutrition space compared to anything else on the market. No one even comes close to the combination of ingredients and certifications and technology that we're including in what we hope to launch, which is the A2 Heritage infant formula. The competitive dynamics are really interesting. Nestle has just entered the A2 space with formula, and so has Dannon. Mead Johnson and Abbott have just launched just about 2 months ago. Very interesting story about a company that has now raised, I can update this, from 2.4 million. They have now raised almost 7 million to date. Very interesting company called Bobby Baby, who wanted to bring a formula to market. They had the right idea. They wanted to bring a European infant formula to the US market, but unfortunately did not realize that simply having Europeans take their formula and put a US label on it was not going to work. You do have to go through the regulatory process, and they were unfortunately asked to stop selling that product, and now have raised additional funds to try to replicate that here in the US. The competition, as I mentioned, number one leader in this is a company called the A2 Milk Company, a publicly traded company on both the New Zealand and Australian exchanges. They were launched in 2000, and they sold fluid milk for the first 13 years or so of their business, and then launched infant formula. And you see how the infant formula sales in particular from 2014 on through 2019 just skyrocketed. There's huge demand for an A2 formula, particularly in China, where 92% of people in China complain of lactose intolerance or dairy allergy. And again, many of the studies early on with A1 and A2 were done in China, showing that the Chinese population could in fact process the milk that was with the A2 milk protein. And so what they've been able to do with infant formula sales in China is absolutely astounding. And they do not have an organic option, they do not have a regenerative organic option, and they do not have one that's based on A2 heritage dairy breeds of cows, but rather Holstein breeds of cows. Continuing to just look at some of the catalysts around what has made the stock for A2 Milk Company just absolutely soar over the last few years. I wanted to take this time at the end just to kind of recap a little bit about why we think that the impact to the environment in particular is superior. And so one thing that I think is very worth mentioning is that in doing something to right the ship of legacy dairy that is not where it should be today, focusing on not just the human aspect of the genetics and the nutritional components, but also what it means for the environmental impact. Not only are we looking at biodiversity in that, as I mentioned before, 98% of all dairy in the US comes from black and white Holstein cows, and there's much needed biodiversity to bring in heritage breeds there, but also the impact on the environment, both from the methane that is released, the resources that are utilized, the water and the feed, and then also keeping in mind this idea that if we want to do away with dairy, or we want to bring dairy alternatives in, science has shown us that we need large animals, pasture-based animals like dairy cows, to really help complete the circle of the ecosystem. If you are doing and implementing regenerative farming practices where the cows are out on pasture and the manure is being used as a fertilizer, and then the dung beetles are able to do their thing and take that manure and sequester that carbon underground, and then feed that regenerative system to improve the quality of the soil and grow from there. We think that not only do you bring something that's better for the environment, but it's a component that absolutely should not be missing from this ecosystem. If we were to take it out, a lot of the other pieces of the puzzle would fall apart. And so we look at this as a critical need for the future of farming in general. You need to have large animals, you need to have the dairy component. So the question for us is, can we do it better? And can we do it better for humans and for cows and for the environment? And we think we found the answer to be yes, if we're talking about regenerative organic farming and using heritage breeds of dairy cows. And that's the goal for us, launching and working to develop these multiple verticals of a differentiated platform that's based on regenerative organic A2 heritage dairy, to do something different and turn this legacy dairy industry around for good. That's it.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Adrian. Really fascinating conversation, and also just really important work you guys are doing. For the audience's knowledge, you can ask a question at this time by using the Q&A box in the middle of your screen, and I will handle those questions as they come through. But just to get things kicked off, while we wait for some questions from the audience, a couple of questions I had thinking through this. The first is, well, actually, it's kind of the second one. As you start to think about the scalability of a model like for the production of A2 milk in this context, do you see sort of as the perception of dairy changes over time that this type of milk will have applicability in all of the wide varieties that milk is used today? So in terms of from baking to cereal all the way up to feeding infants. Do you see it having that kind of broad applicability, or is it destined to be in sort of a specific category?
No, we absolutely do think that that is the case. Actually, A2 milk in general, many farmers across the country, Dairy Farmers of America and others, are telling their farmers breed towards A2, and it takes time to get those cows to come back to A2. The heritage breeds of cows are almost 100% still A2. The Holstein breeds are about only 15 to 20% A2. They have mutated to that A1 milk protein, so it'll take time to get them back. But very many people are looking for this as a solution, if for no other reason than the ability to process milk and to be able to enjoy milk again. But for the sustainability for the long term, we absolutely do see and have seen the shift, right, to the alternative milks. But at the same time, we see with what's happened with COVID, since COVID has hit, you've seen an uptick in the sale of so-called conventional regular milk, organic milk, but dairy milk. And we see it for two different reasons. We see everyone sharing on Instagram a bunch of different recipes, and it's difficult to replace sometimes if a recipe calls for cream or half and half or milk, and you replace it with an alternative. Sometimes that just simply doesn't work.
Right.
And we've seen demand there. We've also seen it as a comfort food. So kids are home from school, or we're home from school, are eating cereal, are doing other things, and it just, having real chocolate milk or real milk, it really is a comfort food. And people have come back, I would say, a little bit to it. And we've seen an uptick over the last few months, to be sure. We do see that the trend over the long term is for dairy to continue to go down slowly. And we think that will peak or it'll have its trough at some point in time, but we don't ever see dairy going away. Nor, again, do we think that it should. And so we continue to be in that space, and we continue to work with farmers to make sure that pricing justice, which is very important for them, is something that we have as a pillar that we continue to communicate to them. We pay our farmers over 100% over the going rate of milk. And so we want to re-educate consumers on what the true cost of milk is also, because people are used to paying $2.99 for a gallon of milk, and that is below the cost of production. And so it's something that needs to also be, continues to be addressed as the milk and dairy conversation evolves.
Yep, it makes a lot of sense. We have two questions from the audience. The first one from Margaret Siegler. Could you talk a little bit about how you're improving the yield of Guernsey heritage breeds to improve output? Otherwise, the environmental footprint or hoof print of the milk is still not good, as you require more cows to produce the required output, which could reduce the environmental benefits.
Sure. So that's an interesting way to think of it. Output from these cows is something that can move along very, very slowly. So the efficiency of the cows is something that can move along slowly. But the idea is that we're getting a more nutritious product out of the cow. So more nutritious milk, a more wholesome milk. If anyone has seen Guernsey cow's milk, for instance, it's yellow in color. It's a dark cream color. And that's the additional beta carotene, the concentration of those components, those higher components within the milk. And so we're not necessarily pushing for efficiencies. What we understand, what science tells us, is that these breeds are more efficient converters of feed and water to milk. And so I would challenge a little bit to say that that's actually what is beneficial to the environment. The fact that these breeds are, in fact, drinking less water and eating more feed for that same gallon output. And so when compared with other breeds of cows, they are more efficient converters for that same output. So yes, they're producing less, but they're producing less with less, proportionally speaking, of the food or feed on the front end.
Got it. Thanks for the thoughts there, Adrian. The other question is, if origin cows produce 4 gallons per day versus 16 for a Holstein, and the methane emission is only 20 to 30% lower per cow, it seems that for the same amount of milk production, the origin cows produce a lot more methane than the Holstein.
So that's another good, it's thinking about it in a different way. So they're producing 20 to 30% per unit, or per, let's say, per cow, not per overall volume. Yeah. So maybe that just wasn't clear in presenting that.
Got it. One question I have, I think, before we wrap things up here is, as you scale this to multiple farms and bring in more farmers, how do you start to think about product consistency and how sort of controllable that is, and sort of what's been your observation to date?
Sure. So for our milk product and cheese and butter, et cetera, where we have 3 different hubs of farms and processors and then distribution, et cetera, we actually pride ourselves on the fact that there's slight variation in the final product based on the specifics of the climate, that the cows are in that's going to be different in Colorado compared to central Ohio. And so there is a standard, and there are a number of standards that we keep our farmers to, but the milk may be slightly different based on some of these external factors. And we think that our customers really like that. They don't want the one-stop shop, the McDonald's, where it's always going to be the same. They want that regional variability that reflects farmers and feed and dynamics within their region. And so we think that's really good. For the other nutritional products that are going to be based on the powdered milk, that's going to be much more standardized, because that's not something that you can do at a small scale. You can't create infant formula, toddler formula, or A2 protein powder in small scale and do that regionally. It's not possible. And so that will be a more standardized product. And those products also fall within higher regulatory frameworks and standards that have to be very exacting. As was mentioned when we were talking about biomilk, the FDA is very, very particular on what goes into the body of infants that are 12 months or younger. And so it's really, really important that that be standardized, and that's done on a larger scale and can absolutely be done in a more standard regulatory fashion in one location.
Got it. Well, Adrian, the last question that we have for you is what can the audience do to help you out today? So, customers, advisors, et cetera, where does Origin Milk need the most help?
So where we're currently working on is this idea of scale. So we're working with the regulatory power bodies, with FDA, and preparing our brief and going into trials with 216 infants. And so the biggest need that we currently have are those right partners to come along with that expertise to get engaged with us as we continue to go down that path over the next 18 months. And as we launch other products in the meantime, really the biggest help for us are people in the nutrition space, in the food nutrition space, who are very interested in the regenerative organic practices that we think will revolutionize and will take things to the next level in farming, and also improve nutrition for human beings for years to come. And so that's where people can come alongside and we can engage with them.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, if you'd like to get in touch with Adrian, what's the best way for anybody from the audience to get in touch with you?
Adrian@originmilk.com. It's super easy. ADRIAN@originmilk.com.
Excellent.
Or just go to originmilk.com and drop us a line.
Sure. Great. Well, Adrian, thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on all the progress to date. I also want to thank the audience for your active participation today. Great questions. Just let everybody know, we host these calls every week on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Central Time, and you can register for Agrifood Conversations as a whole by going to agrifoodconversations.com. If you know someone who'd like to view this webinar, feel free to share it with them. A replay of the webinar will be emailed to you within the next 24 hours, and then they can also register themselves at agrifoodconversations.com. Otherwise, have a great rest of your Thursday, everyone, and a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you next week.